and we're even going to be able to watch his gameplay now in this top 32 round.
Yeah, I'm super excited to see George in action here. You know, for those at home who don't know him yet, he is one of the kind of leading players in Riftbound right now. Super awesome to see him go all the way to China to play in those events and take one down. And the really important thing to note about George is he is a Kai'Sa diehard. He has just been ride or die Kai'Sa all the way, has tuned his list, tweaked it, and is just keep finding edges in the mirror, and it's really showed off. And I believe he actually snuck into today in 64th place, just squeaking his way right in.
Yeah, as you can see there at the bottom, he was 8-2, one of the lucky 8-2s that did end up, or 7-2s that ended up making it into the tournament here. And once you're in single elimination, that record no longer really matters because I guess 8-2 with the win last round. So he wins the die roll, going first here. GeorgeG barely sneaking into the top cut, and now making a deeper run in as we go into top 32.
Yeah, and we're really going to put George to the test here. It's a Kai'Sa mirror match. He's going to get to show off the expertise he has. But, you know, two players at the table, and Kai'Sas take some really unique approaches to the mirror match, and each player tends to have their tech.
Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, his opponent, Talion here, playing Void Gate as our choice of battlefield versus, of course, George, we talked about game one, the Dreaming Tree. Now, of course, I am interested to see what changes George might have made when I did do that kind of deck tech with him, and we're excited to see that inside of the match itself. But I assume Talion, every Kai'Sa list looks a little bit different, Frank. There's a few extra cards you can play, certain choices in the sideboard, of course. You know, I talked about with George, maining Void Seeker in the beginning of the legacy of the Kai'Sa decks, now maybe not so much. So both of these decks could still be very different.
Yeah, some builds lean more tempo, more aggression. Some builds kind of look to ramp up to those Acathian Reigns and Time Warps. And it really can just, the amount of things you can do to look to get edges in these mirror matches are pretty vast. But right now we're just going to see both players start by trying to get a bunch of units onto the board.
Tempo is the name of the game as we play the Cleave into the battlefield with our Watchful Sentry just to draw a card off the Dreaming Tree. One of the benefits of playing that battlefield. And then because we played a card, our Noxus Hopeful only costs 2, keeping 1 up as we pass back.
Yeah, Talion thinking he's got the Pouty Poro here. He can use it to contest this Watchful Sentry. The name of the game is tempo. Scoring points is huge. Trying to get ahead or at least stay caught up. And the Pouty Poro moving in, George looks like he's going to say okay, but wait.
Gonna Stupefy here, which means we do have to play, or no, to buy our own unit, of course, is probably the better here because it doesn't actually reduce the might, but you're going to get the draw from targeting your own Watchful Sentry here, not actually picking the Pouty Poro. Oh, no, we did.
So I believe what George did here, and this is the advanced Kai'Sa tech.
You're right.
This is the thing that George used. He actually used the Daughter of the Void legend to pay for Deflect, because the way Deflect works is it imposes an additional cost on the spell, and since it's a spell cost, Daughter of the Void is like, yeah, I'll pay that Deflect.
That is some next level play, of course, as we didn't end up using any power on our own turn. Absolutely. Now, that means we just got the draw from the Stupefy, not from the Dreaming Tree, and then trading, but we still get the draw for our Watchful Sentry, trading with the Pouty Poro.
Definitely, and George is being like, hey, you know, we're both losing our units here, but Talion, you're not getting a point, and that's what he cares about.
Yeah, also keeping up still on the points here himself, going for the second one with this Noxus Hopeful. But there's a Darius now on the other side of the board that, although it wasn't going to come in ready, it is a powerful unit to have that's going to contest this Noxus Hopeful.
Yeah, and again, just want to reinforce, the players are playing with open deck lists at this point. So both of these players know what the other Kai'Sa player has brought to the table to try to fight this mirror match, and it's going to be really awesome to see both of these just like experts of Kai'Sa figure out how to navigate this.
I kind of want to dive into that a little bit as our players are going to go through some pretty powerful choices that they're going to have to think about. Frank, when you think about mirror matches in general, not just in Riftbound, but in card games, obviously the more and more Legends we have accessible in the future releases, mirror matches will be less likely. But in this current example, how well versed do you think you have to be if you're both going to be taking probably the most represented deck in the room, or Legend? How much practice do you think you need against the mirror match?
Oh, I'm sure both of these players have put a ton of effort and time into learning the mirror and the things that are important. You know, maybe if you're like a Victor player or a Lee Sin player, you could be like, I don't need to worry about the mirror as much. I'm probably not going to run into that. But these Kai'Sa players are definitely prepared. And here we see Talion going in with a Darius, which George is going to try to meet with a Hextech Ray.
Yeah, Hextech Ray is going to deal that 3 to the Darius, which is going to help those Noxus Hopeful once again trade with another unit of Talion and deny that Conquer. But a spell of our own potentially coming in here. It's the Void Seeker, going to deal 4 and then draw a card, which then means that at another reaction timing, we're going to play a Retreat on the Noxus Hopeful, which will be targeting our own unit to draw off of the Dreaming Tree and save that unit back into our hand. Great exchange there.
Yeah, that's what I love about these Kaisa mirrors. They're just real spell slingers. You see a lot of actions in these showdowns. Dreaming Tree also coming in there to kick in an extra card for the retreat. And George saying, like, okay, I'll give you the board for now, but I'm going to build up a really, really large army of resources in my hand.
I think that's the best part, too, right? It feels like George still is on the up foot, although losing that exchange, at least when it comes to the battlefield as itself and giving the point over, it resulted in Talion only going to be able to have one readied rune, whereas George worked with a little, I should say, with only having the 2.
Yeah, and Talion really using Darius to great effect there. You know, a lot of times when you think of Darius, you think, hey, I'm going to play him from hand, I'm going to cleave him to get in there and fight. But kind of the other thing that Darius can do is go into a battlefield, use his ability to ready, and then back out to be good to go next turn.
Kaiser Survivor coming in back. We're going to fight over this Dreaming Tree all day for both of these decks, I think, and it makes sense. But getting that Conquer up, going up to 3 for George and getting the on-draw effect, or on-conquer draw. And we have a ton of runes to play through because we've used our Legend ability in conjunction of saving ourselves the most we can without paying these power costs. So we have a lot to play with here.
Yeah, both players probably going to avoid the Void Gate as much as they can. No one wants to be in there. Maybe a Watchful Sentry, but a really valuable unit like Kaisa Survivor. So like, hey, I'll go over to the Dreaming Tree. You can stupefy me, get some extra cards. That's cool.
Yeah, it looks like a Falling Stars that we ended up drawing is going to be played here. And wherever these reflexive triggers go, it will be interesting to shoot. Double on the Darius makes sense when you get the big one off of the board, whereas the Raven Bloom can be kind of dealt with later.
Yeah, and the pace of play from both Talion and George here is super impressive. These are clearly 2 players who are just super comfortable in their seats, know exactly what they're doing, and are ready to make some good decisions.
Noxus Hobo coming back onto the field with a Pouty Poro to come with it, keeping 2 up once again for George as we pass back to Talion.
George has managed to, you know, secure a pretty nice early point lead here, which is super important in the matchup, but now it's Talion's turn to swing back. It really is just these 2 decks kind of just throwing haymakers at each other, back and forth, scoring the battlefields as much as possible. And just when you think someone's established a lead just like that, it could swing in the other direction.
Yeah, and we're reaching these like key rune breakpoints for these decks, for these powerful cards. We know what Thousand Tail Watcher exists in these lists. You know, we can talk about things like Acathian Rain, the signature spell for Kaisa, and then some of these lists do play things like Time Warp. So the closer and closer we get to that area, the game can all of a sudden be flipped on its head, where it's like, oh, I'm going to take another turn right here, or I'm going to completely try and remove your entire units. What do you think is going to be the key to success for Talion to maybe come back in this game? Because I don't think Watcher here is that great of a play with the 2 extra units in the back foot.
Yeah, so I think Talion, he's just got to do what he can to make sure he's keeping pace with those points. If he lets George get too far ahead, the Kaisa deck is way better at offense than defense, and there eventually will come a point where he just can't keep George off the Conquers. And we are going to see the Thousand Tail come down here to give Kaisa a shrink and to try to use the students to take her down.
Yeah, but with the Hextech Ray here means that, again, George is going to be able to trade with this Raven Bloom student. Or no, it's actually going to deal the 3 over the top unless there is some more spell tricks to help buff up this Raven Bloom. It's going to die before it even touches this Kaisa.
Yeah, Talion taking a look at George's trash. I think he's saying, man, that's a lot of Hextech Rays. Couldn't have played around it. And the Raven Bloom is going to go to the trash itself.
Having a Hextech Ray of our own, though, to contest that, to just stop and get it out of the way. And it makes sense, right? The timing on that card is a little bit harder to pull off when it goes through. One has to completely resolve before we get to the next action, right? Yeah,
getting Kaisa off the board, I'm sure Talion's super happy about that. But the really important thing to note is that he is struggling to score points right now. And this is exactly what we were talking about and gives George a really good opportunity to get ahead on points.
Passing back to George. All of those runes to his availability, and now instead a Thousand-Tailed Watcher of his own, which I can imagine, again, just to hopefully contest that 7 might body that's on the other side of the table.
Yeah, you don't see this as much, the Thousand Tail without Accelerate, but George just being like, hey, I just want stats on the board. But what you do see very often is combining it with a Falling Star to take down something you normally couldn't, and George quick to do that and clean up the last unit that Talion had available at the time.
Excellent play here, getting around that 7 might body with the double use of the Thousand Tail Watcher as well as the Falling Star, and for a double conquer going to 5 with nothing left on the board for Talion and only the 3 cards in hand plus the one we're going to draw.
Yeah, George really just showing off why he's established that reputation as a master of Kaisa and just putting on a real great show for us.
I love high-level gameplay, Frank. I think the fact the further and further we go into it, I'm actually going to be a little disappointed because I won't be here at the later points of this desk. And once we get to, that top 8, that top 4, that finals match, it's not only the highest stakes that you can think of, but it is going to be the best players in the room this weekend.
Yeah, this is really a dream for players like this, where Kaisa is just such a gamer's deck. There's so many decisions, so many interaction points, and sometimes people will shy away from a mirror, but a mirror like this, where you just get to really make all these choices and impact the outcome so strongly. I know a lot of players have been loving it, and it's going to be just interesting to see how Talion and George can do.
Kaisa Survivor coming in for Talion from the champion unit zone. We did accelerate it and then easily fought off against that Pouty Poro, finally getting a point onto the board again for Talion, and now a Falling Stars coming in as well to remove that Noxus Hopeful because it has that awkward 4 might. That's one of those breakpoints, the 4 and 7 might, really being difficult for yourself as a Kaisa deck to deal with.
Yeah, I'm sure not Talion's favorite way to use a Falling Star, but heads-up play to just be like, hey, I need to stem this point flow that's coming from George. If I don't fight back here, I'm just going to fall too far behind.
George being very good also, if you watch him play on point mapping, of course, as you can very much see the kind of lead that he's built himself here. I don't think he's worried at all about how to get to 7. It's that what resources do we use right now to get to 7 to then solidify and lock in that 8th one.
Yeah, he is reaching that critical point where he can threaten to double conquer at any time, looking at his hand and trying to figure out the best way to do it.
Seeing cards like Cleave in his hand that, as we saw earlier on, even in this game, of just using them for value when you go to the Dreaming Tree just for the extra draw and finding more important key cards. But it looks like the first Darius Trifarian going to be coming in here for George, and all he has to do is play another card, I don't know, like a Cleave on our Watchful Sentry onto the other battlefield, draws us a new one, goes to 6, and then that Darius would ready up. Or just target itself right now. The great play to make Darius basically a 10 might attacker just from this 2-card play for 6 energy.
Yeah, interesting decision point here from George. He has to decide, do I just want to go in with 1, go up to 6, set up the double conquer next turn, or do I want to go in with both, go to 7, and threaten a hold, which will just win me the game on the spot? And the way he's playing it out, it looks like he might be trying to establish that hold.
Yeah, we're going to get a retreat, though, through from Talion. Going to save the Kaisa. A little unfortunate because we're not on that Dreaming Tree, so it's really just going to save the unit and not get a bonus draw. But a Watchful Sentry follow-up here. Takes the point, goes to 6, and like you said, posturing for that double conquer later.
Yep, George decides, hey, 1 battlefield is enough for me right now. I don't need to try to hold. He probably feels that exposes him to too many things that could kind of take him out of the driver's seat, and he's just going to be like, I'm going to go for the double conquer because that's what Kaisa does best.
10 runes for Talion.
Yeah, normally, some decks play Time Warp, and you're like, ooh, this is my Time Warp turn, but not looking great on this board if Talion has access to it.
Yeah, you really need units. It's about, like getting the 2 turns of holds or something like that when you have that incremental advantage. Of course, then it just feels like you were going to win anyway because of how much of an advantage you have. But even the units in your battlefield means you can play them or have them ready to go, play things like the Time Warp to guarantee yourself another turn, use those resources, and then have another turn to back them up. But not going to be the play here, as the Kaisa that we just saved, the Survivor, going to be coming back and accelerated once again, hopefully to draw us another card at one of these battlefields that we conquer with it.
So now Talion has to go in the tank, see if he could come up with anything to hold off this double conquer next turn. There's already a Thousand Tail Watcher and a Watchful Sentry down, and the cool thing about Darius is he can kind of do a pseudo-ganking impression, hold the 1 battlefield, move back to the base, ready up, and just launch an all-out assault with all of George's units on the Dreaming Tree.
Love it, love it, love it. Even had the privilege of casting a Darius match yesterday, and the fact is that a legend like Darius gets to keep that Trifarian in their pocket, but when you don't get to do that, a lot of these Kaisa lists, you see them playing 3 full copies of the Darius. That's how impactful it can do for doing plays just like you said.
Definitely, Barrett. So Talion will pick up another card from the Conquer trigger to try to help him hold off George's offense. He's thinking, he's doing some math. Definitely a spot where even if you feel like you're behind, you're not going to give up without a fight.
Do you think there's a 5 rune play here we can do to even come close to saving ourselves? Because even when you pass, right, George has all of his runes that he's going to have access to help the offensive, not just what's already on the board.
So Darius is at the Void Gate. It makes him a little easier to take down. Something like a Void Seeker would be able to do the job, and we might be seeing that right here.
Yeah, there it is. Targeting that Darius. Going to draw another card as well for Talion. Helps out those resources. With only 1 energy, it looks like we're going to have to let it go. Yeah, the Void Gate coming in clutch here, at least for that specific situation. So that helps out.
giving Talion another card and another option, but his runes are running low.
2 left. Still a Watcher. Still another Watchful. There's 2 Watchers on the other side. Watch for 1,000 Damn Watcher and a Watchful Sentry as we just passed. Keeping the 2 up. Going to have to do our best to stave off the double conquer here.
Yeah, and this is a spot where, as Talion, even if you don't have it, even if you don't have a way to stop it, you got to make the opponent do it. You got to put George to the test, because maybe he'll shy off, and maybe he won't go for the double conquer, and that would buy Talion another turn.
Kathian Reign seems to be the show here, as we are going to pay fully for this, which is going to completely remove this Kai'Sa, plus more.
Yeah, George is saying, hey, you know, I'm not taking any chances. This is for the win. I'm just going to blast Kai'Sa Survivor with her own ability into oblivion.
Send them all the way. Moves in with the 1,000-tailed, and it looks like that's going to be game 1 going to George, representing the Kai'Sa here.
George doing what he does best with that Kai'Sa deck. Talion putting up a pretty good fight, and I believe George was going first that game,
yep.
Which from what I understand, is a strong advantage in the Kai'Sa matchup. So now Talion is going to get his chance to crack back.
Yeah, battlefield choices here. Vile Ma's Lair, which we saw George talk about and showcase yesterday. So great to see it here and when he's going second. Not necessarily a ton of movement tricks going on here for the Kai'Sa deck, but that thing we talked about with Darius isn't really possible when you're not allowed to come back to base from the Vile's Maw, whereas Reaver's Row over on Talion's side.
Yeah, we really just have both sides of the spectrum here. We have Vile Ma's Lair, which says when you come here, you can never leave, and Reaver's Row says when you can come here, you can leave whenever the hell you want.
Early turns, pretty simple usually for these decks. Love even, Lecturing Yorta, one of my favorite cards actually, just because of, I love the tank trade. I think it's really good at making the math difficult for your opponent. And of course, it just draws you a card on entry, of course.
Definitely. And, Talion getting Kai'Sa Survivor on the table, always a strong turn 2 play.
So game 1, we saw a pretty big discrepancy on George taking full control of the game and being able to always have a point lead and always feel like Talion is always playing catch-up. How does Talion then now put on his own helmet and be the person in the driver's seat?
Yeah, so I think Talion just, going first, he's going to look to do everything he can to get stats on the board, maybe pick up big tempo plays with Noxus Hopeful, and just kind of do exactly what George did and score as many points as he can, as fast as he can, while then using the cheap spells to fight back and pick off George's units. And right now, we're going to start at an even 1-1, but see what George has to follow up with.
Yeah, Falling Stars coming in again for the early removal of the Kai'Sa Survivor that we spent our entire turn as Talion playing that time. And that's even, I think, why Talion chose to go into the Reaver's Row, because we were like, well, if I'm completely tapped out, I don't have a trick to make this Watchful Sentry work against a trade. Why not just save it for later? But now being answered by a Falling Star, I mean, that's what you spent your whole turn on.
Yeah, definitely. And that will cost George a rune, but I think he's willing, going second, you do get that extra rune, and he's willing to sacrifice that to get Kai'Sa Survivor off the board before she can start drawing some extra cards. Now, an interesting dynamic we might see here is if this Watchful Sentry, so it's going to go to Vile Ma's Lair, but if it came to fight at Reaver's Row, there will be that moment of, you can retreat, you're currently winning, but if you stay, then you can no longer retreat, and I get to play my tricks. And I love that point of tension, and I hope we get to see it this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw George be kind of like the master of those tricks, even though, we saw them both slinging spells, of course, but I felt like every time George was either defending a battlefield or attacking into a battlefield, he was being up on the trade, except for maybe one scenario. And we're already kind of seeing that as well, of just like, it feels like Talion is like almost avoiding him a little bit based off of the cards that are just in his hand. It kind of shows a lot on the posturing.
Definitely, and this would be a great spot for something like a Noxus Hopeful from Talion, but it looks like he's just going to get a Lecturing Yordle of his own down and then send it George's way.
These boards look very similar.
They do look very similar. Couple units, they all draw cards one way or another. George looking at a nice hand of spells, and he's going to have to decide what he wants to do here.
What do you think? I guess this isn't necessarily like a big competitive picture, but when I'm looking at to build a deck in a game like Riftbound, unit-based, but having a legend like Kai'Sa that really benefits from having these spells, especially with power costs, ratios, I think, is something I really value a lot. I'm a math major, by the way. So when I think about it, it's like when you see a hand that's filled with so many spells, is that bad? Is that not necessarily something you're looking for? Let's say they're even spells that don't necessarily replace themselves, like the Stupefies that exist in the world, right? Or the Void Seekers. When you don't have as many units per se as like a set deck or a Darius deck that is, very unit heavy, when is it sometimes that it can be a detriment that you have a bunch of spells instead of creating a board presence?
Yeah, so I think the sweet spot that the Kai'Sa decks try to hit is just having a healthy amount of spells that do have that single power cost. That way you can maximize and try to use your legend, every turn, every other turn, and make sure you're getting good value out of it while still building up your rune total to hit the bigger spells like Time Warp and Acathian Rain.
Draws ourselves a new unit as we just traded our Watchful Sentries away with each other. No point to be gained, obviously, for George. Now just playing a Watchful Sentry and now passing, holding up those 4 runes, which I can only imagine are for all of these spells that we have.
Yeah, it does look like both players might have one of those kind of more spell-heavy draws as the units aren't hitting the table nearly as quick as last game. But Talion has used his Kai'Sa Survivor, while George choosing to keep his a little safer in the champion zone to deploy down the line.
Very great point. I mean, George, I think, played his on a very opportune time. Didn't even pay the Accelerate Pagos that we saw in Game 1. Neither did Talion, but spent up the whole turn, whereas George can basically wait now and delay it when you can play Kai'Sa plus more things to be progressive on the board.
Yeah, there is always that risk. And, ooh, here we see a pretty interesting exchange because, Talion's going to get to draw a card. The Lecturing Yordle's going to go back to the hand. That's going to be a rune for George. So kind of just a lot of cards moving around, but I think George is going to be pretty happy to build up that rune total, and he can even replay the Lecturing Yordle down the line.
And then with his own Void Seeker to rebuttal against the Lecturing Yordle to potentially stop and deny the point. Wouldn't it be a play if there was a retreat of our own that we could play here just to keep it alive?
Hey, I mean, that's why they call it a mirror match, but Talion instead going to let his Lecturing Yordle die, and I do think he had the retreat in hand, but he's going to higher value getting this Darius down and ready to score some points.
Makes sense. Darius feels a little bit safer now that George has completely tapped out, now playing enough tricks of his own. Darius coming in with 7 might and going to get that point that Talion was really trying to get off the bat.
Yeah, and Darius in Reaver's Row is a menace because you're not going to be able to, even if George had a Darius of his own, Talion's Darius could run away and try to conquer again the following turn.
And still in that weird breakpoint, right? It's got 5 might, so Falling Stars we're going to require both of the investment. With the only unit on the board, I guess you feel pretty good if that's an answer to it, but just out of range of things like a Void Seeker.
George looking at his hand. He's got a lot of options, doing some math. Both players taking a pretty good opportunity to kind of slow down this game. A lot more spells flying, a lot of decisions to be made, and making sure they want to make the right ones. And here it comes, the Reaver's Row check. Do you want to retreat? Do you fear my Watchful Sentry? Or Darius, do you want to try to hold the line?
How many Watchful Sentries are you ever afraid of, Frank?
I mean, Talion does have no runes available.
Yeah.
So if he stays, he is just saying, hey, George, I think you're bluffing. I think you don't have it. And that's a pretty bold claim to make. So Talion is going to respect George's play and back out the Darius.
If I'm in Talion's position, it's really hard not to have that respect because you're already down a game. You feel like you have to keep your resources available, but that's exactly what George wanted, right? I mean, that's exactly what he's looking to do to progress in the points, to catch up. At one of the biggest downsides of going second is just not being ahead on points necessarily, and all of a sudden, we have caught up just because you can posture and make your opponent scared.
Definitely. And, Darius, Talion's only unit right now. He has lost his Kai'Sa Survivor, so it could be catastrophic for him if he, tried to stick to his guns and it wasn't a bluff.
Going to go ahead and accelerate this Kai'Sa and immediately move it into that Biomaw's lair. Going to get the Conquer draw, of course, and another point for George, and all of a sudden, now he's in the lead towards victory.
George is in the lead. He's doing a great job of playing on the even numbers, but Talion is going to kind of have that first opportunity to attempt to go to 5, and if he could do that and kind of just keep that small point edge, I think he's still very well in this game.
Yeah, we're hitting, again, those critical break points for the Kai'Sa decks. Things like Thousand Tail Watcher are available now and on the board, and there would be easy trades and get very large might bodies onto these battlefields that George will now have to spend more resources to get through.
And very, very important to note for Talion, I did see a sneak peek of a Time Warp in George's hand. And Talion, it is open deck list, so he does know that's on the table, and that's a card that can just throw all the math out the window. You think you're safe, you think your opponent's on 4, but uh-oh, look at that. George could double hold the 6, play the Time Warp, and win the game on the spot. So Talion's that's just gonna be an extra layer of pressure that Talion's gonna have to think about.
Yeah, it cannot be a setup turn. It must be a proactive going and contesting these battlefields. But with the Reaver's Row, going to help keep more of those units alive. And again, I think just when you go to play a Time Warp in general, it's just about already having units on board.
Definitely. And Time Warp really one of the funniest cards to me when listening to Kai'Sa players, because some will swear it's broken and some will swear it's unplayable. And I think I know which side of the fence George is on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thousand Tail Watcher, though, coming down here. Looks like we are not going to pay its accelerate cost, but it makes sense. And then we are also going to go ahead and play a spell. Looks like to be a Falling Stars, as we're going to pay the 2 and still have to recycle 1. So Falling Star here with the -3 means we're going to get a huge value here on removing 2 units of our choice no matter what, and only having to put 1 of those triggers on the Kai'Sa.
Yep, Talion choosing to go for that Watchful Sentry over the Poro, doesn't want to pay any deflect, and George with another retreat to pick Kai'Sa back up.
Retreat so high impact here, and with the Watchful Sentry still dying, we're going to draw a card as well, and now we still have access. With the second card being played, though, that means this Darius is ready, and they're going to decide to keep it there or move it back. What do you think is the best play?
Given that Darius is at Reaver's Row, I think normally you would back out, but since the row kind of lets you do that for free, sort of, in combat later on, it seems like Talion's going to stick to his guns and say, hey, I'm at least going to make you to contest this before I move out.
Counting runes, making sure we're up and a bunch spent. Completely tapped here out for Talion. I mean, it's crazy when we think about cards like Time Warp in this situation. When your opponent has 0 runes, it's not just for 1 turn, it's actually for 2 of them after, if you play a Time Warp.
Definitely. And with that count there, I think George was kind of doing a Time Warp check of his own, being like, hey, can you play a Time Warp the following turn? And when he counted, he saw 7, so no. So that's not something he has to worry about just yet, and he can see if he can take the time to set up his own.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that double hold that we talked about, or you talked about earlier on, but instead playing the Pouty Poro. And here we are. This is the first Time Warp that I'm going to be able to announce. Time Warp coming in for 10 and 4 recycles. Of course, Kai'Sa can pay for 1 of those, and it means we're going to still have 1 rune to play with. But no matter what, George is going to get another turn after this one.
Yep, fool me once and I'll just rewind. Time Warp going to the Banish, and we're going to see if George can use this extra turn that he's going to get to close out this game in a window that Talion might not have expected.
Yeah, now going to 6 here on the hold, which means George has a whole nother turn where he just gets to play setup, maybe even contest things like this Darius and this Thousand Tail Watcher as long as we have some removal. But all of those runes that we spent, this second Time Warp actually coming into play here with Kai'Sa, the last 3 Mind Runes. And this is exactly something that George was talking to me about in this interview, where you play 7 and 5 of the split here, of the runes here, because all of your late game choices like this Time Warp are the ones that cost you this Mind. This means the hold will actually take us to 7 points here with the Pouty Poro, and now it's just as simple as a Falling Stars Darius or the accelerated Kai'Sa that we picked up earlier with the retreat to be the game.
Yeah, I think 1 Time Warp, I guarantee you, is on Talion's radar, but playing around 2 Time Warps, almost impossible, and George is going to just do exactly what he has to do. There's the fist bump, there's the match. George just showing why, like, he loves this Kai'Sa deck, because he just knows how to pilot it so well.
I've played a little bit of League of Legends, and using Echo's Ultimate is a little hard twice in that quick succession like we saw in that game. Masterful gameplay there from George, a actual master class when playing a legend like Kai'Sa, even against herself, of course.